Welcome to the September 12th, 2020 NMRA-PCR Coast Division virtual event. In this event, Seth Neumann gives us a view of his Union Pacific Oakland sub by showing a tour of the railroad from the standpoint of Local 54, the Pleasanton Turn.
Hi, welcome. Welcome to the NMRA-PCR Coast Division Saturday virtual event. This is September 12th. We have a really exciting layout tour today with Seth Neumann, and Seth's going to walk us through his layout, which is both designed prototypically for scenery, but also for very prototypically for operations. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to Seth and have him introduce himself and talk about his layout and his modeling.
I'm going to give you a little tour of the Oakland sub. Actually, originally I called it the Union Pacific and Niles Canyon, but when I was working with Harry on this RMC article, Harry being, primarily a rail fan, although a fantastic modeler, he just referred to it as the Oakland sub because that's what it is. So I have changed my documentation in general to reflect that. This presentation is going to follow mostly one of the local jobs. So you'll kind of have the perspective of the crew doing their work and passing a few other industries. So the focus will be on the places that the 54 local, the former Pleasanton Turn, works, and we'll kind of wave our hands at the rest of the layout. And the plan is to come back and do a similar presentation for some of the other jobs as we move forward. So this is what I would call the money shot for the layout, the crossing of Alameda Creek on the Niles Canyon Railway. This is Harry Wong's photo. And as you can see, Atherton was kind enough to produce the Jeep 7 that, or Jeep 9 that Niles Canyon uses, the former SP 5623, which has been beautifully restored. And we got, the Farwell Bridge. Dave Parks kit bashed this. It's got the correct skew. It's a little bit compressed, but generally a very close representation. And, to me, it sets the scene. Anyway, let's talk about the Oakland sub. Why is it the Oakland sub? This was very soon after I came to the Bay Area. I discovered this driving around while I was in college one Saturday afternoon, and it's a unique prototype, two railroads within 100 yards of each other for 20 miles. Heavy mainline action on the UP side, particularly prior to the SP merger. I'm a few years later, but the traffic patterns still persist. Interesting tourist railroad. When I first started, one of the things about the Niles Canyon Railway was their collection was, I guess you'd say, eclectic or opportunistic. So it was sort of an opportunity to throw anything you had that was out of area in. But they've narrowed their focus, and so have I. But the ultimate plan is to get my car builder certificate by covering all of their rolling stock. And that's an ongoing project that will be going on for a long time. And of course, one benefit of modeling this kind of prototype is that it's close to home. In many cases, even before we had Google Earth, it was fairly easy to just jump in the car and go over and take some pictures. So, we had the usual design issues, limited space and resources, the John Armstrong, Givens, and Druthers. Ultimately, we built an extension onto the house, which the conversation was something like, we either need a new place or we need to do some real work so we have a nice master bedroom suite. And the answer was, sure, honey, but a man's got to have a mainline run. And the result of that was a 14 by 34 purpose-built room with an office hung off the side, which is also serves as a dispatcher and clerk's office. I wanted to get operating as quickly as possible, so that dictated a somewhat simpler design. And after some discussion with Byron Henderson, the key features were simplified single deck construction, no time-consuming and engineering-intensive helixes, and concentrating on a few large industries. So wanted it to look like model railroading, not a lot of single car industries. In the end, we modeled parts of the Oakland sub, hence the name, which is the scenic Niles Canyon part, and then there's industry on the former Western Pacific San Jose branch, which became the UP Milpitas sub. One of the reasons for cutting the time frame off in the spring of '99 was right after that, UP sold the branch to the VTA, which ultimately built a BART line, which finally just a few months ago opened up. So this is about as late as you can model this with reasonable, prototype credibility. Here's a track plan, and we'll keep coming back to this to keep you oriented, but you can see the room starts off on the left as a former 12 by 12 bedroom. We then extended a 25 by 14 section, but it opens into the patio here. Here's the original part of the house kind of coming down there. And the office where I'm sitting is right here. So as an operator, I'm mostly concerned about the jobs on the railroad. And in particular, I wanted to model the 54 local LRV, local Roseville area, number 54, was also known as the Pleasanton Turn. There's a job that works back and forth from the yard to NUMMI. There is a BNSF trackage rights local in the real world, but it comes onto the railroad at Steege near Richmond. In my world, it leaves Mormon Yard and comes over Altamont Pass. Now, I've had a number of BNSF engineers and conductors operate on the layout, and they are uniformly of the opinion that it would be a much better run for them if the real world worked the way the model does, because they very often spend a couple hours bottled up at Steege, and it would be a nicer run, and it would be former WP. And then we have the Mission Bay local. This is, we're all familiar with it. It runs from South San Francisco late at night, comes into Milpitas early in the morning, and exchanges cars that are ultimately going up to Roseville. And we handle that also. But today we're really going to focus on the Pleasanton Turn. We've also got a dispatcher. And, when I'm not dispatching, I like to run the yard. I like busy, highly visible jobs when I operate. So, it keeps me on my feet. And but then I learned from Dave Bayless that Milpitas never had a yard master or a dedicated switch job. So it has a clerk, and the crews generally do their own work. And at first I was a little disappointed, but then when I worked out the jobs, I realized that the locals were much more interesting, and even the transfer runs had some real work. And then finally, there are transfers in the ACE commuter train. And very often, at least with an experienced crew, I just run those myself because, it's not enough work to keep a full crew. So let's follow the 54. It starts in Milpitas as a turn. It works only trailing point switches, runs all the way across the visible layout to Radom, which is East Pleasanton. In fact, if you looked at Phil's air quality map before we got started, you were looking right at the eastward extent of the run. It turns on the Y at Radom, which was actually gone by this era, but I kept it because it's the connection to staging. Really, it's a point to loop layout, and it turns out to solve the problem of turning 54. It's a very popular job because it covers the visible layout. So there's some nice scenery, and you get to see it all. So when you're starting, and we'll see this graphic again and again, you're starting at Milpitas, which is the south, UP came in, and everybody knows that railroads run from east to west, but it is the south end of the railroad in 1999. I know that's an offense to the laws of God and man, but that's what we have. And the crew is going to pick up their train at the east or north end of Milpitas Yard. And so I was able in '97 to coax a friend of mine who's a flying club to fly me over the railroad, and I got some very nice low altitude shots. Today, of course, you can supplement that with Google Earth. And this is basically the main yard. Everything comes into Milpitas and then runs up the Oakland sub, which is pretty much a secondary, right? The primary being the CalP. Milpitas has classification tracks and storage tracks. Now, in the real world, the storage tracks were largely, I'll turn that phone off so it doesn't bong us, for storage of racks going into the plant. We use them for a couple of other things, so it's a little bit representational. But nonetheless, the engine track is over here, and this is where the 54 is going to find its power. Their cars will be over here on the AD track and arrival departure track, and they'll go put their train together, get it blocked, and get to work. And here you can see they're tied up. They're still tied up at the engine track. A tank truck has come up to fuel them, and the clerk has come out on his little four-wheeler to give them their work orders. And at that point, they're going to back down on their train, and the first place they're going to go by is Snowboy. Now, this job is actually switched by the NUMMI job and also the trackage rights train. But you can see this is a tight little bulk transfer facility, which is more of a modern era team track. This is actually across the street from the Home Depot and REI in Newark. And you can see it used to be a packing house, and there's the Snowboy with his oranges. Couldn't quite get the angle the same, but as you can see, we were able to model 7 tracks by about 4 cars instead of 9 tracks by 8. But most of these tracks have unique commodities handled on them. And for example, this is the off-spot track, but these two are for hoppers. There's plumbing coming over to move pellets from the plastic cars into a silo. That facility is actually not in Milpitas. I put it up there more as a view block, but it is modeled pretty closely after a real facility in Guelph, Ontario, that I got a tour of during the Toronto convention in 2003. On the other side, we have various types of tanks, chlorine, acid, and general, which is mostly petroleum and ethanol. You can see we've got some electrical pickups and some transfer pumps here. And then, and you can see the Snowboy facility is nestled in one end of the NUMMI plant. About 30% of Snowboy's business is chemicals headed for the plant, mostly plastic pellets to make door panels and dashboards and various interior components.
By the way, Seth, just a comment for folks who are not in the Bay Area. The NUMMI plant was a GM Toyota joint venture that took over a GM plant that is now the Tesla plant in Fremont. So that's actually a big auto plant.
Have you been reading ahead?
I'm sorry.
No, that's quite right. That's exactly true, and there's some interesting history about that, but we'll cover that in more detail in the NUMMI job presentation when we do that. And again, you can see that there is a support yard here at Warm Springs, and then there's an auto rack loader, which actually has its own Y, so you can turn the auto racks, because auto racks have to be, you can't back cars off of them. And you know, they have to be all aligned in the same direction. So there's a fair amount of art to this that I was trying to model and just ran out of space. So we are assuming that those cars were all turned over there somewhere. But this is NUMMI as it appeared in '99. And a lot of people say, well, you know, but what about the Tesla plan? And the answer is, well, it's '99, and at this point, we're making Tacomas as fast as we can. If you remember, it's the height of the internet bubble, and it's busy. It's running, I think, 7 days a week by 2 shifts. Mike Cohen worked in the plant, and also a guy named something Henderson, not Byron, was a conductor on this job, and they both gave me a fair amount of information on how it was actually done. So just backing up, there are some charts here of, you know, what's in there, but we're not going to switch it, so we don't need to go into a lot of detail. As we pass NUMMI, there is a facility that has 3 tracks. It's drivetrain, general auto parts, and steel coils. The building you may actually recognize from the Gillig facility that's on the north side of 92 on the east end of the Hayward, San Mateo Hayward Bridge. So while it is a vehicle facility, the open loading dock doesn't actually exist at NUMMI, but it's a similar facility not too far away. And anyway, Ed did a spectacular job. You'll see here that this is going to be a catalog of great work done by other people. I mostly do the boring stuff nobody else wants to do, or that needs too much cleanup and has to be done at some time other than work night. And then at the other end, we have the 86-foot auto body parts and the racks. And this track layout is very clever. Dave Parks actually did this. All the tracks involving long shoves of these long cars, which normally would be a problem to shove, are done through number 8 Pico Code 83 turnouts. And you really don't get a feeling for that until you're standing over at the south end of Milpitas shoving in. And, you know, operational reliability has been very good. So as you drive along 880 and you look at the plant, you see long rows of containers. There had been various proposals over the years to load those on containers at the Port of Oakland and you know, bring them down by train, but for various reasons it never happened, and they're actually trucked the 35 miles to the port. Interestingly, after NUMMI shut down, UP still owned the land next to Snowboy and wanted to put a container lift there, and the city of Newark decided no, they'd rather have light industrial development and wouldn't allow it. So anyway, you know, container shipments to this area were alive as recently as 2002 or 3. It's since been built over, so it'll never happen. And here's the track plan. And note that there are these little click books, car locator inventory card or charts for every location, and these are for the benefit of the operators. So if you operate, you'll see these charts on one of the fascia at the appropriate places. And then here's the rack loaders, and a big shout out to
Seth, can you pause for a second? We have someone on mute, and I've lost control of being able to mute people. Hang on, let me mute everyone. Okay. Go ahead and start. Go ahead and pause and start. I'm going to go ahead and start again.
Start sharing again?
Yeah.
Okay, share.
Yeah, and everyone can mute because it's just a lot of background noise. So
oh, yeah. Okay, so can you see it should say NUMMI rack loaders?
Yep, that's good. It's working.
Super, thanks. Anyway, a big shout out to Steve Williams for building these train cat loaders. They're these intricate, beautiful, and absolutely impossible, at least for me, to assemble etch brass loaders. And but Steve, with his N-scale fingers and eyes, was able to do a very fine job on putting them together. So, you know, my feeling is you don't get a layout this size operating in a reasonable time without a lot of help, and I have no pride about asking for help. All right, let's see here. Okay, here we go. So finally, we get to work, and this is right at the point where the hidden Niles sub comes in and joins Oakland. So you now found one of the key operating features of the layout, which is that from the perspective of the layout, the Niles sub goes to Oakland because it runs off to hidden staging, whereas the Oakland sub goes to Niles over here. Who is it who said, I'm not making this up? That's really the way it works. And here's really one of my favorite structures on the layout. And of course, it's an Earl Gerbavon job. And Earl and I spent several days over the last month or so getting this ready for a photo shoot we're doing in support of the 2021 convention. And you guys will all recognize Lehigh Cement. It's actually on Industrial at 880, and apparently we've had some interesting tectonic activity because it's now in Niles. But we do have the loading shed here and here, the silo, and the bag warehouse here and here. And this is fairly well modeled, and you can see a bunch of lovingly graffitied cement hoppers being served by the plant critter trackmobile. And Tony Thompson did that weathering. So Tony actually does some modern era modeling, and happily I'm the beneficiary when the mood seizes him. As you can see here, we've come along and exchanged hoppers with the critter. And the critter is very handy because, as you can see, it has wheels. So if he runs out of room and can't complete his pull without leaving plant limits, he just puts his wheels down and drives around, and it turns out that's exactly how it's done. I love the new fencing. This was all Earl's work recently. And the 54 is now backing a reefer, obscenely clean, I would say, into the Niles team track. And here he is setting it out. And about a day after I took this picture, the refrigerated truck I had purchased to complete the team track scene with the reefer showed up. So we've now got the truck full of hazardous waste barrels and a lumber truck here. But one cute thing you can do is look and see what's going to get spotted at the team tracks and put the appropriate vehicles there to receive them. So team tracks, of course, were much less popular by '99, but I've kept them on the layout because they are the universal industry. So any kind of interesting open load can be shipped to a team track, and I've kept them here. So you'll see that there are a few industries on the layout that are, I guess, on life support. They're there much later than they persisted in real life, but it gives us more industries to switch. And here's the track plan. And again, you can see that the sidings are labeled with the number of cars and the size of the cars that you can get in. So that helps the conductor plan his moves if he's new to the layout. We also indicate which are manual switches, and generally industrial switches are push switches that you can throw, because really the only locked or automatic switches are ones controlled by the dispatcher. So I'm trying to keep that distinction in the operator's mind and require some communication with the dispatcher when you need to get on the main line. So having completed switching in Niles, we then head up into Niles Canyon, which is the more scenic part of the layout. You know, if I'd had a little more space, and I've promised Byron an article for the LDJ one of these days called "What Would I Do If I Had Twice as Much Space and Half as Much Space?" I'd have a little more open running room in here. So here's a photo from 97. You can see the Brickyard pretty much in ruins, and the west portal of Tunnel 1. So this is the UP, former WP main. And you can see that the Pabrico Pacific Brick Company yard was actually served off the Southern Pacific, or what's now the Niles Canyon line. And this was during the second Iraq War, I guess, and we were making some jokes about it. Looked like the senior Iraqi leadership had been meeting there. But you can see the remains of the kilns and the chimneys. And that this is a recipient of our small pool of 50-foot free-rolling boxcars. And a couple of Mr. Plaster kilns, a well-painted backdrop. I think Sam Romerstein did this. And a little loading dock pretty much completes the industry. And the switch coming off to the left next to the caboose, we figure the 54 does a fair amount of shoving, so they still get a caboose in 99. This over here runs up onto the Niles Canyon Railway. The tunnel, of course, is the main line. And here we are disappearing into the west portal, or south portal, I guess, in UP days, of Tunnel 1. And by the way, prior to the SP merger, Tunnel 1 was the longest tunnel on the UP system. And whoops, that's going the wrong way. And then we head up towards Farwell. Now at this point, our train, the 54, is in the tunnel, but out on the fascia, the Niles Canyon is running past Farwell. And here's a couple of shots. And of course, you saw Harry's cover shot at the top of the presentation. So again, beautiful bridge work by Dave. This water, because people always ask about the water, was the Woodland Scenics one-part realistic water effect. I had very good luck with it, which I gather was not the general experience, but I kept the pores very thin. This is maybe a total of 3/8 inch thick at the deepest, and that might be 6 pores. So I was very, very careful to keep the pores thin. I had originally wanted to model the CAL FIRE station up on Pleasanton Knoll Road, but there was just no way to work it in, so I settled for a CAL FIRE truck, figuring that would trigger some sense of place for people familiar with the area. Okay, now the 54, of course, is still headed for Hearst Siding. It's been in the tunnel for a while, and most of you are familiar with Hearst because it's visible from 680. Obviously very visible from Pleasanton Knoll Road over here. We modeled the road, and if you look very carefully on the backdrop, there's a few inches of 680 modeled. And here we're in the hole for a meet with the ACE. You can see that we've also got the UP maintenance of Wayspur, which actually it was a year or two after my era. They finally completed the interchange with Niles Canyon Railway. So on most sessions, we have brought some UP equipment up for a tie replacement project in Pleasanton that we show a little further down the railroad, and some historic railway equipment is being moved from Niles Canyon Railway to maybe CSRM or Portola or any other place we can think up a waybill for. So that's a good way to get some interesting historical equipment on the railroad. And again, you can see we're in the clear, and the ACE is approaching. And you may be asking, you're a good technical guy, why is there no Helicon focus? And the answer is I'm moving computers and my license expired, and I didn't want to renew on the machine that I was going to decommission. So these are all iPhone shots. Then as we continue, now we're going to switch that that siding later, but because it's facing point for us now and we're at turn, we'll pick it up on the way back when it's easier to work. And then there's the bridge where the Western Pacific crosses over the old SP right-of-way here and the Pleasanton Sentinel Road there. And again, we modeled that pretty carefully. David Parks did the bridge work. I did the roads and some of the weathering, and there's a whole bunch of interesting little details on an item-by-item basis, and you can compare this with the view from here, and it's pretty close. I'm very pleased with how it came out. Notice the old shopping cart, which was sitting in the pile of gravel at the end of the siding for years. Finally, when UP came in and replaced the old searchlights with the hooded type Ds, they cleaned this up. And then I assume that Niles Canyon has come up there and left their speeder while they're doing some track work. Oh, one other thing that might be of interest is the backdrops here are painted. This is, again, mostly Sam Romerstein with a few adjustments later. And to get some depth, these are, the closer layers are all painted on 1/16 styrene. So there's actually several layers of styrene, and the effect is that your eye catches the edge of the styrene, and the depth is that you perceive in the room is much, much greater. You know, you don't feel 1/4 of an inch, you feel 3 or 4 miles. Anyway, let's see here. Here's Pleasanton. We're doing a bunch of interesting work. Pleasanton is under redevelopment. After the last bay rails, we took it apart, and we're really planning to have it all together for ProRail, which would have been in late April this year, but obviously we were overtaken by the pandemic. So Pleasanton is on one side of a short peninsula, which has resulted in some compression and having to deal with the fact that the whole thing is really just a very large S-curve. Originally, we had this very nice kit-bashed Type 22, where Dave started with this AMB kit and then extended the freight house end to handle the sushi joint. And there's a mortgage company up here, and I think there's a hair salon. And actually, over the period that we're interested in, the tenants were quite stable. But the problem was that building the thing full size didn't quite work. As you can see, it's almost hanging out over the edge here, and there's no place for a realistic transition, and the team track is way too squeezed. So in the end, we decided we would build the left-hand version of the depot, so the interesting side was facing the aisle. We're going to do some animation. We'll provide a full interior with lighting, and it sits right over here, kind of behind the Ace commuter station and Villa Armando winery. And as I say, these things are all scattered over a mile or two, and they're all really cheek by jowl in here, but it does allow us to get a lot more industry, and there's a little switching puzzle with a switchback to handle Rickert Lumber and BNSF. Rickert is not rail served today, although at some point in the past, whoever was the lumber yard there was, but they were served off the SP side. And then here's Villa Armando. This was really gone by 86, but you can see there was a spur and they were rail served. The Tri-Valley Historical Society did have this shot. I tried to get this bridge in. There was just no room for it. Interesting story was rumor had long had it that this was a mafia-owned winery, and it was basically a money laundry. And in the spirit of that, there is a cement car that has a waybill that periodically shows up there in case they need more overshoes. But the Historical Society lady says, no, it was just a family feud. There was a lot of bad blood, and ultimately they sold off their business just as the Tri-Valley was becoming a fairly reasonable wine appellation. So anyway, it's now Mondo Condo and no more winery, but we have a little fun with it. I did check with Providenza because he was on the Livermore police force in the 80s, and he said no, they were, they certainly didn't recognize it as a mob-owned business. So I suspect that Beverly at the Historical Society was correct, but it's a much better story. So as Bill Kaufman says, we're not going to let the truth get in the way of a good story. And then here's Villa Armando as it stands today. Originally, this was a Walther's Pleasant Valley Co-op warehouse, I think. And, oh, we need to stick the sign back down. We replaced, I think Earl built this new deck, and I lit the building, and you can see over here, there's a mock-up of what I'm calling a laser bash building, but I've drawn all these walls up in Inkscape, and I do actually have them cut. Richard Brennan was kind enough to arrange to get these laser cut for me, so that's a very high priority project to finish that. And we'll have some tanks and a little tasting area and a picnic area. Earl built these wonderful little columns that, make it kind of look like one of the nicer wineries in the Livermore area. So we're trying to get that in. Then we have a little hill with a picnic scene on it. So this should come out very nice when it gets done. And we do switch the winery on the way out. And you can see this is Trailing Point. Coming up from Pleasanton. Now we need to turn the train, and then we go out to Radom. Radom was the point where the San Ramon branch met the SP main, and WP crossed it twice, so there were two crossings. I actually have a little tower which I used to just mark the end of staging. I don't think there was ever a manned tower there, but it's kind of a nice visual to mark the end of the scenic layout. And the 54 comes out and turns and then heads back. You can see the Y here. And you're now on the far end of the small peninsula opposite the workbench. So this is a fairly tight area. If we do some sort of socially distanced stop before we resume full operations, this area is going to take a little bit of planning, or we may need to restrict it because it's just tight in there. But Kaiser has an industrial switcher. I'm using a Bachmann 44 tonner as a stand-in. The real one was a Plymouth CR8. There were only 8 of them built, so I doubt anybody will ever make a model of it, but it has the same wheelbase and truck wheelbase as the 44 tonner. So I eventually plan to build, probably 3D print a CR8 body. That'll be an interesting clinic in itself. And then the 54, which again, being the UP job, historically the SP handled the gravel, and the only WP work there was a little bit of sand, which was used as locomotive sand, and that was handled with front end loaders. And here's the 54 in about 2000, maybe 99, running by the Rhodes Jameson plant, which is the gravel pit just to the east of Kaiser. Kaiser had already been decommissioned when I took this picture, but you can see RJ is there, and I believe it's still in service today. And here we have the 54 on its way in before it's done its turn. And again, here's another Earl Gerbavon. This structure, I believe, took third place at the 2011 National in Sacramento, and we since added all the conveyors. Peter Barnes and I did all these sand piles and gravel piles, very carefully trying to compress the angle of repose of the piles. I think it came out pretty well. Here's an aerial photo of the real deal, so you can see the conveyors here and here, and the crusher and sorter here and here. And then Earl built these diverters, and there's a wonderful story around that too, but I'll try to have some respect for your time today. And you can see the hoppers getting waiting to be switched. They'll be handled by the 44 tonner. We also have some truck traffic under the tipple. And then here's the sand spur, which is going to be handled by the BNSF on trackage rights. And again, typical 4-axle power, it was 38s, 40s, the odd GP15, the very odd still in Rio Grande paint GP30. So there's interesting, funky 4-axle power, one of the charms of the era and region to me. Just over here, over your shoulder, is staging. It's a little bit older picture, but the staging arrangement hasn't changed. There's a drop down in the corner, and this allows me to stage, you know, eight-foot trains, or as it usually works out, the BNS local's a little longer, the ACE is a little shorter. So there's usually 6 or 7 in there and a little bit of space so they can get by one another. Then we come back. And this is a little out of order in that it's in Milpitas, but I wanted to point out that at each place that you're likely to work, I've created what I call a workstation for the crew. So there's Velcro copiously applied to the layout. Here's the general schematic layout of the whole layout, so you can figure out where you are if you're new. There's Velcro to hold your cab, your clipboard. Notice it's all done with switch lists, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The track charts I pointed out, a little block with picks so you don't have to have the picks in your pocket, you know, tearing holes in your shirt and stabbing yourself, and a place for your drink. And, you know, drinks are pretty much allowed, just try and keep them below the level of the layout. It's now industrial carpet tiles, so if you really irreparably damage them, I can pull them up and replace them. This is roughly, you can see the oil truck where we picked up our train, and this was taken after it returned, so you can see the end of the return 54. And there's our photo of Mission Peak and Mount Allison behind us, which should help orient you. Okay, so having toured the layout, let's talk a little bit about the ops plan, which is, you know, what I live for. The industry jobs are the NUMMI job, which runs back and forth between the yard and the plant. As I say, we'll have another clinic on that if Phil will have me. Mission Bay Local, which includes the critter. He brings all the cars in from the peninsula and the Santa Clara area around Newell Yard. Early on, the crew actually magically becomes the critter crew and goes off and does all the critter jobs. So they switch Lehigh with the trackmobile, switch Kaiser with the 44 tonner, and run the Niles Canyon Railway, which usually drops off a piece of historic equipment. And by the time they're done, 54 is out of the yard. The NUMMI job is well into its first pull, handling auto parts, and the crew can come in and do their set outs, switch the local industries, and do whatever work the clerk has for them. The locals are the 54, which runs the first half of the session, about 2 hours. Then we typically break for a meal. And then in the afternoon, we have the BNSF trackage right local coming out of Stockton, and they essentially run in the opposite directions and slightly different mix of industries, but it's another local that runs the layout. Then we have a series of transfer runs. Either part of the Mission Bay crew will do that, or I'll do it. The ACE commuter, and any overhead traffic is required. Occasionally we'll run a special train. Somebody will bring something interesting that we can work into the ops scheme. Let's see, typical call board, Mission Bay local at the beginning of the session. ACE 5 is running westward out of Manteca. NUMMI is, usually we start them, they've just arrived at the plant, so they're not in the way on the yard lead. And the Mission Bay crew goes off and becomes the critter. The 54 crew builds their train up in the yard, and then everybody gets to work. And as you can see, at about 1 hour intervals, there are through trains coming through. Those of you who have operated on the layout, and I see a few of you, will recognize all of this. Then, well, where's the rest of the operation? It's basically all happening in the office, which is a fairly busy place. I'll be hanging out here watching over. I'll have a dispatcher and a clerk. And the railroad is dispatched with CATS, which represents Digicon, which is actually what SP was using. This piece of railroad was sadly never dispatched with Digicon, but Breezy Gust, who was DS57 out of Roseville, this was actually handled by his neighbor, DS58, brought me up to Roseville, sat me down in the big chair and coached me through handling his piece of railroad and explained to me why I didn't want to use CAD, which was UP's system. Let's say lots of green screens, lots of typing, lots of 3278s. Those of you of a certain age who remember those things can understand why it wouldn't have been much fun. Digicon is much more point and click. It's very nice. It's a wonderful layout, and I will make a blanket extension. When we are back to being able to operate in person again, if you are working on your dispatcher certificate and need some time in the chair, come on down, we'll sit you down, we'll get you started, we'll get you 4 hours of DS time. You'll have a great time. It's not too hard. You won't mess anything up. You'll enjoy it. All good software really works well. The brains of the operation is the clerk, and you notice that there's what we call the pickle rack, that stands for Perpetual Inventory Car Locator. Is essentially all the car card boxes located in one place, and from this the clerk, in this case it's Pat, who's one of my regular clerks, and I would love to take a cheap shot at Pat because he always responds well, but he does a really good job, and you can see he's working his switch lists, and he's aided by a radio frequency ID system, which when you drag a train over the readers will print out the cut list in order, so all you need to do is fill out the destination. So it takes most of the writer's crap out of the clerking job. And he's got it well in hand here. Essentially, it's car cards and waybills transferred to switch lists. And we talked about the wheel reports. So here's a little bit of just facts and figures, or Phil, we as product managers in telecom can't do a presentation without the cloud diagram and the speeds and feeds. So here they are. NCE wireless, 4 dog bones and 3 knobbies. I do have a Y-throttle server that one of my pandemic tasks is to get it running, and I have a hard throttle, and of course you'd be able to operate with Y-throttle or engine driver. We use 2 5-amp boosters, lots and lots of TTX power shields and auto reversers. Layout control is done by tried and true CMRI. We use DCCODs, and actually now my model railroad control system CPOD, which is a drop-in compatible detector for detections. There's a mix of classic Chubb S-mini nodes. They work great, no need to replace them. And as I've been adding more stuff, I've got a couple of CP nodes. Part of that is just to prove compatibility. They are. Turnouts control, we talked about this a little bit. Most industry stuff, except for a couple that are too far to reach, is all with manual switches, with slide switches switching frog power. A couple of them where the reach is more than about 2 feet, or the switch is up behind something, are done with tortoises or my MPE1 switch motors. The motors on the main line are generally controlled by the dispatcher or electrically locked by the dispatcher. And, you know, we're implementing that with some of our hardware, but it can be done with the software, and CATS and JMRI handle it well. Track is typically code 83. I started out hand laying, but I'm frankly not wonderful about it. And before I got good enough that I could get switches built in less than 3 tries, Pico came out with their North American outline code 83, and it's wonderful. It's very good, a little bit pricey, but works first time every time with very, very little work. I just switch them to live frog from power outing, and that's a standard feature that they give you instructions for. Then just about when we were done, Fast Tracks came out, and they're probably the best of the bunch. You know, they're a little bit more trouble to deal with the manual switches, but the geometry is perfect. You can't even tell when you cross the frog if you, you know, put your finger on a little truck and run it over there. So if I had to do it over again, I would go entirely Fast Tracks. Here's one of the original S-mini nodes. Should have taken a new picture, but there was just too much junk in the way. Nobody else has junk breeding under their layout, so I'm sure that's unique to me. You know, wouldn't be a Seth LD SIG presentation without some lesson learned. We're just about winding up, Phil, so we should hit our timing marks. I use double slot shelf bracket. That was quite the trend in the late 90s. Good news is it's very light and easy to work with, and easy to rearrange height. So it's a good thing to do when you're planning your heights and your angles. But unfortunately, it's not very flexible, because the slots only give you, you know, every 1.75 inches. And while the doors are light and easy, they're not very much lighter than just using furniture grade plywood with a little bit of a box structure underneath it. So if I were to do it again, I would probably just screw 2x2s to the wall, and then build little brackets with gussets and just mount them wherever I needed them. The bench work in the end isn't very much work, doesn't take long, and you probably have the carpentry skills, and somebody in your round robin certainly does, so I wouldn't mess with the slot brackets. But you can put them in your garage. They make great heavy storage. Use blue or pink foam for scenery. One problem is it's hard to get the 2-inch stuff, which is easier to work with in California. The Midwesterners love it because it's easy. You can cut your drainages and stuff with it. I would not lay track directly on it. Big pain. Very hard to get the angles exact. In the end, I went back and used plywood cookie cutter. That worked okay. It's a little expensive because you don't get the best use of your plywood. But the layout wasn't very big, so in the end it was just 2 sheets of plywood. If I were doing much more than that, I would do it with spline, and lots of good approaches to that. That's Paul Weiss does a good clinic on that for his Central Vermont. Lighting, lots and lots of, it was originally Chroma 50 fluorescents. They've now almost entirely been replaced by LED replacement tubes. I'm one of those guys who needs a lot of light to see. It's enough light that some people find it painful. it's about what we as photographers used to call F8 and B there. In other words, with ASA 100 film at F8 at a 60th, you have a good exposure. So it's like being outside on an overcast afternoon. If you want to do lighting effects, one big benefit with the LED tube replacements available is if you pay a few bucks more, you can get dimmable ones. So you can, you know, dim it down to about 20 or 30%, add accent lighting. I didn't particularly care about that because I didn't want to do night ops, but it is nice to turn off the lights and dim it and just let the building lights run. Bench work, I think Combox still sells. You can certainly find on eBay. Lynn Westcott's book on bench work. Everything's true. I would just go 1 inch bigger in the dimensions. So instead of using 2x3L girders, I would make them 3x4. And the reason is you just get a little bit more flange and it's a little easier to screw stuff together. You could probably get a pocket jig and that would work. But you know, there's nothing like just grabbing drywall screws and screwing them in, and so a little bit bigger would be better. I also would make it a point to wherever the peninsulas join to the walls, and in my case it turned out to be in both cases under windows, I would just put a big plate across them, like a piece of 2x8 or certainly 1x8, and then anchor the peninsula to that base and have the plate on either side of it. You know, and whenever you need to take the layout down, and hopefully it'll be your heirs' problem, not yours, they can just you know, unscrew it and patch up the holes. It won't do very much damage. And what else did we learn? Oh, so the backdrops are aluminum flashing coils. There was a lot of skepticism, particularly about how this would interact with radio throttles. Turns out to work fine, very easy to do. The only real surprise there was it's aluminum, so it's not at all porous and it doesn't absorb the paint. So you need to go find the absolutely thinnest nap roller you can when you paint it. But installing was very easy. Just got 5 or 6 tall people, many of whom are on this call, to help hold the thing up and snap it into the J-track. Fascia, 1/4 inch masonite, and then we put a little lip down at the bottom of 1/8 inch, and that stiffened it up tremendously. So my suggestion would be, even if you don't even have all the deck filled in yet with scenery, put the fascia up early. It's going to make everything a lot more rigid. Gives you an easy place to start running your wiring and mount controls. You can start operating right away. This is usually where I make a pitch for work night, always looking for more people to help whitewash that fence. But obviously we can't do that for a while. So, questions, comments, anybody still awake?
If you were to redo this layout, Seth, would you actually like maybe make it sectional so that if for God forbid, if you did have to move for some reason, you could actually just tear it down without having to do, you know, totally self-destruct it?
Well, you probably wouldn't, because it's mostly done on 6'8" door sections, which, so if I were to do it again, I think I would make it on more or less, I mean, the 6'8" wasn't horrible. Somewhere between 6 and 8 feet is correct, in my opinion. Oh, there we go. I would just make them, as I say, plywood with little girder boxes underneath, and they'd be a little bit thicker, but you'd have better control over the angles, and then they'd come right apart. I think with a little bit of Sawzall help, this would probably come apart cleanly. The problem with doors is there's never a hard point where you want one. So this requires a lot of shimming and screwing around for the places where it sits on the brackets, and again, those weren't exactly even, so there ended up being a lot more shimming than I would have liked, particularly because the brackets cant up, so you can't just, you know, cookie cutter a bunch of brackets out. But yeah, sectional planning, I'm sorry, who's Jim asked that? I think that's a really good idea. I would do that in general, no matter what, particularly because I think we're all facing the possibility that we might need to downsize at some point. And, you know, if you can salvage a usable chunk, why not?
So there were a couple of questions on the chat. The first one is about the critters. So all of your critters are operational and have decoders and.
Yeah, everything yeah, nice question, Chuck. No, there is absolutely no place to put a battery in that trackmobile. And of course, there's no motor mechanism for the road wheels. The 44 tonner, I don't know, maybe a generation more of battery technology and we'll get there. Niles Canyon, it's, you know, it's either their NW2 or GP9 usually. So yeah, those could be run dead rail, but there's no particular reason to. You know, there's plenty of room to run around in Kaiser and the Niles Canyon Railway. So no, you know, I mean, I love the challenge of doing the Keep Alive project, but I'm a little skeptical of them because frankly, my operating experience with them is they're just as likely to run away into dead rail where you can't control them as get you over a dead spot. So I don't know. There's some future install. Now that I've got them, I'll probably use them, but you know, they've never been a big priority for me. Go ahead.
Cool. Yeah. The other question was just a question about whether you were going to model social distancing in the winery area. That was a, you know, as you modeled the winery area, we're going to maintain social distancing at the tables and the picnic as a kind of reminiscent of this point in time.
Yeah, you know, no, I don't think so. I think we'll, you know, it's 99. Like I say, we're making Tacomas as fast as we can. We don't need no stinking batteries. And
we can get as close together as we want.
And we can get as close together as we want. You know, they're not masked. Of course, about half the figures actually, Mike O'Dorney, if you'll remember, did a very good figure painting clinic a few years and might come down and work periodically until he got a little more focused and organized his own round robin group up in the East Bay and didn't need to drive all the way down here. So he painted a bunch of figures for me, but I think I need to bring him back and paint a bunch of masks on these people. But no, I think we'll be modeling a happier time here.
Well, that was excellent, Seth. Really appreciate it. It was great. And you know, I think it really shows what you can do when you're both focused on modeling as well as a very specific prototype and how to operate. So it's very cool. So that kind of concludes what was our formal content presentation for the day. So it kind of opened it up for folks to talk about their modeling, what they've been doing this week, anything interesting and exciting. Got to have some interesting, exciting stuff going. Thanks, Seth.
Yeah, give me one. I'll bring something back. But somebody else talk for a while.
Somebody's got to have something interesting.
Yeah, this is Steve. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I discovered a couple new numbers last week, and I ordered them. And I'm trying to get my work on Zoom. Screw that. They're made by, the first one I discovered was made by Slice, the ceramic blade people. And let's see if I can show it a little. See, it doesn't show very well on this camera. And what it is it's a fingertip knife. You know, thank you. It's a fingertip knife. You're going to hold like this and do cutting. You know, this one happens to be the Slice one with the ceramic blade. And I ordered this one. You can get one only on sale for $10 at I'll think of it, Amazon, under $10. After that, they're going to charge you an arm and a leg for shipping. So I got this one for like $8. And then after I ordered it, I happened to look and say fingertip knife. And under fingertip knife, in addition to this guy, who is a full circle, I ended up with the fact that Excel makes one that's open in the back. And it was only $5.48 through Amazon. And so I ordered it too. And the nice part about it is it's part number 16071. You know, again, that's backwards. But anyway, it holds blades size 5, 6, 10, 11, 12, 13, 16, 17, and 21. So it'll handle a lot of different blades. And it works the same way in that you hold it in your hand. And one of the things I discovered yesterday, I finally got around to using them on modifying a outer box for my iPhone. And first thing I did is break the tip off the Excel, of course. But the other thing I noticed is I find them very useful to hold just normally. You know, having a short knife, I may take another X-Acto knife and cut the blade, half the blade off, and or mangle it into something you can hold in your hand. Because having a blade that you can get right, your fingers right to the tip of the knife, turns out to be useful for some things. So anyway, for under 15 bucks, you can get a slice blade, which should last a long time, and it should hold regular number 11 blades. But the fact that the Excel one was only $5.48, I think, free shipping, and it'll hold all these other sizes. I go, fine, you know. I thought I'll give it a try, and I haven't used it on a lot of different materials, but other than cutting, you know, polycarbonate, and I really recommend it's worth, you know, spending less than 10 bucks on a new tool, and being able to get my fingertips all the way down to right next to the blade. There's a background. Yeah, I'll show this a little bit. I mean, I can get it as close as I need to. And so as a chopping blade too, if you put a chopping blade on it, that would help too. So it's really a step forward in terms of blade technology if you're not doing everything cutting wise with computers these days. So I wanted to share that with people. So I got both of them, and like phone number, you can look it up. It's 16071, and Slice, of course, you look up Slice's things, and it's called a precision knife for ceramic blade. And you know, they're just fun. Any questions?
Cool. I think it's in the chat, the slice knife. So slice or the finger knife on Amazon will find you those. So that's good. Yeah, that's excellent. Excellent.
We've got a meeting coming up Saturday. I can pass this on to everybody and say, what an improvement, you know, for some jobs. And work for everything, but like I said, I'll go, hey, now that you know it's there, you can order one if you've got free shipping on Amazon for sure. You know, it came within 2 days, both of them. You know, they were fast. So, okay, that's all I had to share.
Excellent.
Yeah. And it was a great presentation. I haven't been to your layout, obviously, in about 5 years, I think, since the last time I bought something. It may have been 10. And it's,
yeah, everybody can hit the reaction and give Seth a round of applause. Guys, excellent, Seth. We really appreciate it. And I think you had something you went to get to show.
Yeah. So I showed you the beautiful train cat loaders, but he, I gather, went out of business. There was a family health problem, whatever. Anyhow, I'm not sure if those products are available, and I certainly had kind of used up all of Steve's patience. So I had some of the Walthers loader that they issue periodically. And what I wanted to do is, this is sort of a funky product that they made. It had, you can see this one is primed, little rail wheels on it, and it was very unusual for the rail mounted loaders to be used. They generally had, you know, dually tires on them. And I had never painted them, so they kind of stood out. And as you can see, I took them off the layout because I just thought they were not improving the look. So that inspired me to go pull out the parts I had and upgrade them. And I'm not sure, this one maybe is a little more visible. added some plastic tubing to act as axle bearings and replaced the rail wheel with C-channel and making a few other improvements. And we'll paint them safety yellow instead of faded plastic blue. And I'm hoping that will flesh out the wreck loader scene a little bit. So that was kind of inspired by cleaning up the layout.
Cool. Anybody else got any other interesting rail? So I actually had a couple of pictures I thought I'd share. Hang on, I got to close this. Go over here. So I don't know if I'm building a module that is actually a module of Moss Landing, and this is actually an interpretation of the Standard Oil fuel dock that was actually in Monterey. The building is actually just a paper mock-up and kind of where the tanks are going to go. But I had this problem. I bought a resin kit this is O-scale ON30 for a fishing boat. But when I looked at all the pictures from Monterey, they all had a fly bridge. So basically put a styrene fly bridge on. Looks kind of dirty now because it's still got the pencil marks on it, but that'll actually be a completed ship when it gets done that matches what was there. And just a couple of pictures I'm now done with dirt work, and this way I can get Earl to comment and give me comments on how well I'm doing as we go through it. But just a few photos of kind of where I'm getting to on modifying the module. So a little bit of sharing. Anybody else got share? Oh, I think Guy's.
There we go. All right. Can you? Hello?
Yep, you're there.
Okay, so this is just doing some interior lighting on a scratch-built building. And I also have my cheap China voltage regulator there for the LEDs, which these turned out to be really great at $2 each. They work very well.
Fantastic.
And built, but I wanted to make it basically a refrigeration unit. And I lighted LEDs, put a bunch of details on the inside of it. Anyway, that's what I've been up to.
Cool. Cool. Anyone else have anything interesting? So anybody else got anything they want to show or comment, or we'll call it a day? Cool. Well, thanks everyone for coming, and we'll plan on seeing you in 2 weeks. Next week, look for an announcement on Friday for next week at 10 o'clock a.m. Our multi-divisional meetup, our virtual event, and we'll have this event 2 weeks on the I think it's the 26th. Yes, Steve.
I just wanted to thank you for doing all the work for putting this all together again today.
Oh, super. Don't thank me. Thank Seth. This is all Seth. That was a brilliant tour, Seth. And I love the combination of the local facilities, the track plan, the diagram, making it all very understandable for people how it works together, and the thought and planning that went into it. So super. Well, everybody have a great week. Stay safe, and we'll see you next week.